I hope all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael get well. I hope nobody dies of COVID.
Or no one gets infected with COVID as well.
Yeah, I hope nobody gets very sick or infected. And I just wish everybody a financially successful week, a safe week, and a healthy week. Amen.
Kevin. Okay, so let's continue now with the theme of Shemitah, and now we're going to just do a few paragraphs from this section, which is if I eat produce which has Kedushat Shvi'it, must I do so in a special manner? And Kedushat Shvi'it means sanctified in the 7th year. Because this produce has added Kedusha, it must be treated in a special way. That which is normally eaten raw, for example, radishes, should not be cooked items. Cooked items. Items eaten cooked, for example, squash, should not be eaten raw. That which is eaten raw or cooked, for example, tomatoes, apples, may be eaten raw or cooked. So you mustn't deviate from the normal way of eating it. Even if leftovers from a meal, if they are still fit for human consumption, should not be merely thrown away with the other garbage, as this would cause them to rot more quickly. Therefore, Shemitah leftovers should ideally be wrapped in a plastic bag and placed in a separate garbage pail. After 3 days, this pail may be put in the garbage as usual. Substantial amounts of food left on one's plate, enough that would normally save it, should be discarded as per the above instructions in a special Shemitah pail. Food stuck to the plates or silverware may be discarded as usual. And non-Shemitah food attains Kedushat Shvi'it when it is cooked with Shemitah produce. For example, in a cholent or soup using vegetables that have Kedushat Shvi'it, so all the ingredients absorb the Kedusha. Thus, the entire cholent or soup is considered kodesh. Water used for boiling Shemitah produce, for example, boiling corn, may be discarded as normal, since one would not normally drink this water. Juice may be pureed or extracted from Shemitah produce, from Shemitah fruits, if that is the normal practice. For example, grapes, lemons, oranges, grapefruits, and oil from olives. However, some suggest that carrot juice should not be made. Okay, let's do the next half tomorrow night.
Okay.
Cool.
Just want to say something to you guys quickly. Gav, it's what I thought about your question, and I actually looked at it on Google Images and certain things like that, because Gavin had a brilliant question. Funny, but insightful. It was brilliant and funny at the same time. He said, well, listen, somebody digs a pit. How do they last long enough to end up digging the pit before they die if an animal absorbs the foul in and ends up dying anyway? You know, how does it get long enough for them to finish the pit? And my view is even to pay the penalty. So the reality is, Gav, is what happened is you just take normal human development, you know. If you look at anthropological development of people, right? They've invented fire, they found fire, whatever it is. Hashem gave them fire just before Shabbos or whatever. The first idiot burnt his hands. The second idiot burnt himself to death. The third person realized that maybe you could cook food, release the nutrients, and maybe not to touch it. It's the same thing when you're digging a pit. First one popped off, second one popped off, and I think after millennia, eventually people realized that you take a bit of fabric, put it around your mouth and your nose, and perhaps the lung cancer would only hit you when you're in your 60s. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not going to be immediately when an animal falls in. It's not going to have that protective sort of gear. But you must know people didn't live long then either. If they didn't, I'm reading a book here just quickly called Trick and Treatment to show how medical trials actually developed, how sanitization and sterilization worked it out, how to do a double-blind test, medical double-blind test, alternative therapies, and some of the problems involved in terms of not being able to analyze the critical information, etc. And basically, through processes of trial and error, people learned what was going to be a life end unless you had some sort of protective gear. So animals didn't have that. So just an answer to your question, I took it seriously.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. It's a good answer.
Okay. Is it a satisfactory answer?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's satisfactory.
Yeah. All right. So let's just let me just tell you something. One other thing is that they used to keep in the mine a cage with a bird in. I don't know if you know this.
Canary.
They used to keep a canary. That's exactly right. And why, Kevin?
I think it could find its way out. You have to suss out where the eggs not.
No. It was in a cage. When the canary dropped dead, that mine obviously was releasing certain chemical toxins like
gases,
carbon monoxide, methane, things that you couldn't detect from smell that would render a person dead. So they used to keep a canary down there. And if the canary, because canaries are small, if you put a bird in a freezer, it dies relatively quickly. Or through gases. So that was an unsophisticated way to test. I'm saying, seriously, that's how they used to test. All right. So let's just quickly go to the next part of the Gemara, because what we did yesterday was very simple. We found that there were 3 Rabbonim that came to Rav's rescue to try and reconcile the Brisa, which was contradictory to our Mishnah. We also found a way that Shmuel explained the Mishnah that seemed contradictory to him. And I don't want to do a repeat of yesterday. It's not necessary to lose any further time. So having defended the challenge to Rav, the Gemara adduces support for his opinion. Rav Hanania taught in a brisa in support of Rav. The Torah states, if a man shall uncover a pit and an ox or a donkey shall fall into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. Where's this, guys? Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 33 to 34. I'm sure you know the verse off by heart by now. We've been doing it for a while. The expression and fall implies that unless the animal falls in the pit in the normal manner, which is head first, that would be the default position. Who says this? Rashi Rashi says most animals fall into a deep excavation, fall head first, and this is the presumed intent of the verse, meaning that if the animal fell forward because of the sound of the digging, it wasn't the sound of the digging, but it was the normal way that the animal fell forward, the owner of the pit is liable. But if it fell backward because of the sound of the digging, he is exempt. And both this ruling and that ruling refer to when an animal fell into the pit. What do we mean? Is that it actually has to be not where the animal dies on impact, where part of its body is outside the pit, where it hits its head, but it actually has to die within the stationary hazard. Okay. So now we've clarified the meaning of the Mishnah's words. The Gemara is going to proceed to analyze its ruling. And I'm going to ask you guys some questions. I realize Arthur can't, he's working. So good news for Arthur, he's gotten out of it just as well. And the Gemara answers, okay. Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said, whose opinion is this ruling? It's the opinion of Rav Nassan, who says that even when an animal is made to fall by another party, the owner of the pit did the damage. What do we mean if an animal is made to fall by another party, the owner of the pit did damage? We're saying that the fallen animal was found dead in his pit. So the person who actually dug the hazard bears the ultimate responsibility. But I want to bring your attention to one particular factor, is that we're not saying that he's the only one. When it says, it uses the term ultimate responsibility, it's a bit of a, I wouldn't say an incorrect term, but the more accurate term in English bears certainly partnership responsibility. Why? Because the one who caused the fall is obviously certainly responsible for the damage. But according to Rav Nassan, the owner of the pit is also responsible. And in a sense, it can be considered more responsible because the animal died in his pit. So they're certainly both liable. Let's put it that way. Okay. Now, what's the question here? Well, the question is as follows: is that we basically say, look, there's one or two problems that are occurring. The first problem is that let's look at the factor. Now, the digger actually started with the animal with its sound, okay? and that caused the animal to fall in, right? So why is the owner of the pit liable? Because he didn't cause it. In other words, if it wasn't for the sound of the person digging, the animal would never fell into the pit. Okay? So that's the question that Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said. He's saying that it must be a case that we're holding like Rav Nassan. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense because the rabbis don't hold like that. The rabbis hold a position very clearly that the one that initiated the damage is the one that's solely responsible for the damage. Rav Nassan is saying, look, if you have two parties involved in the damage, they share responsibility. So that's the first thing to consider. I'm going to take questions now. I just wanted to go through one or two things. And then, there's another principle we learned from Rav Nassan, and he said that basically wherever it's impossible for the damaged party to recover his damages from this one, he recovers from that one. What do we mean if it's impossible to recover from this one or that one? We're saying, look, there are two parties involved that damaged the animal or killed the animal jointly. So if he cannot recover the financial damage from one party, he recovers it from the other party. Okay? Now, I don't know if you know of a concept where if a person borrows from the Rambam Trust Fund, you have to sign surety who's ever lending the person money. Say a person's borrowing 90,000 Rand, okay? And then you've got the person and a family and one or two friends that are each signing maybe a 30 grand a piece liability or 45 grand each. You've got two parties. Then ultimately what happens is it's got the term jointly and severably. Okay, not jointly and separately, jointly and severably. What does that mean?
Severally.
Severally, yeah. That's what I said, Kev. I didn't say separately.
Did you?
I didn't. I said it's not jointly and separately. I said it's jointly and severally. I said.
I didn't hear severally. I didn't hear you say
severally. Yeah. Because somebody said to me, I remember, he said, I've got very close veins. I said, no, you've got varicose veins, not very close veins. And a friend of mine said to me, it's jointly and separately. I said, no, it's jointly and severably. What does that mean? It's a concept that means either if there's part money from one party and the other party, and they both can pay the debt, they jointly pay the debt of the person that's absconded from their responsibilities. Okay. Severably, which means either party can be held liable, not separately, which means each party is held liable for the amount separately, like partners that split. And severably means they can, if they sever the relationship where the one cannot pay, the other one has to pick up the responsibility and the slack from the other party that signed surety. Okay, so jointly and severably applies to Rav Nassan's case, because he said, look, in our case, therefore, since the damaged party is unable to collect from the digger, he recovers the entire amount of his damages from the owner of the pit. So I've got a couple of questions to ask you guys. First question I wanted to ask you guys is, Kevin, let me ask you a question.
Yeah. I'm just putting the ice on my leg. Sorry.
What happened to your leg? Just to digress for half a minute.
My Achilles tendon's a bit tender. And when you put, I went for a run today. It's not hectic, but it's a bit tender because when you tie your shoes, you mustn't put your shoes on. You must untie your shoes, and every time you put your foot in the shoe, you tie it. I think that's what happened. I've had it for about a week and a half now, but it's not hectic. Anyway,
okay. Okay. All right. So are you fit to answer a question? Are you okay?
Yes. It won't be my Achilles heel though, hopefully.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but the thing is, the point to throw a spanner in the works, that if the pit didn't exist, the ox wouldn't have fallen in it, even though if the sound caused the ox to fall. It may have fallen on the ground, and then it would have got up and dusted itself off, and business as usual.
Correct. So the Rav Nassan is saying the point of it is exactly that. Had there been no pit, it didn't matter. You could startle an animal all day. It wouldn't fall to its death. That's what Rav Nassan would say. Exactly the same sort of thing. The rabbis don't agree. They say, look, at the end of the day, you exempt for an animal that's intelligent and is got a normal brain faculty. In other words, it's mature. It's a mature animal that it knows its way around pits. It's intelligent and it can see the hazard. There's normally an exemption process where the owner of the pit would be exempt. In this particular case, he wouldn't have fallen in unless there was somebody that startled him. So they're both responsible. The rabbis are saying no. In other words, they just look at one factor: who actually caused the damage. That's how the rabbis look at it. So you can see it from both points of view. One question I want to ask for you, Kev: why should the digger pay? And if so, why? And if not, why? I'm asking Kevin for a reason.
Why should he pay full damages?
No, I'm saying, should the digger pay? Should he pay anything? Should he pay something? Should he pay nothing? What do you say?
Well, maybe if the animal was intelligent, maybe the sound wouldn't have bothered it, wouldn't have bothered it, and it wouldn't have fallen in. Maybe it's dependent on that.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe, but if animals are bothered by such sounds, then maybe he is liable.
All right, I want to ask you something. Let's take that as a case. I'm in the car with somebody, and suddenly I walk up to them. They're driving the car, and they're driving. All of a sudden, I go to them, bah! Like that, and they hit the car. Now, who's the stupid one? The one like me who gave him a fright, or the intelligent one driving? So it's not a lack of intelligence on the animal's part. The animal got a fright. It's not like it's not like when the animal's got its normal faculties that it can navigate around the pit, or has experience, or has intelligence to see a hazard. And Gavin, do you have any insights into this?
I did. Let me just think about it. So the digger shouldn't really be out there digging because he's doing something that's not legal. So the fact that if you're an agent, then you go out there doing something that's illegal, then you're responsible for that. So I would say that the agent would be responsible in that particular case.
Okay.
So that's one thing. But I have seen as well where the owner of the pit is jointly liable together with. So I'd just like to confuse with them. I need clarity from you on that, actually.
Okay.
I've just forgotten. I was with my boys today. So,
Yeah.
Well, so the animal will always be of sound mind, even if the digger made a disturbing sound.
Yeah, it's true. So, Gav, let me just give you a little bit of clarity here. Now, you're on point in both regards. Okay, the first thing is, you've got a concept called Ein Shaliach Lidbar Aveira. Okay? So what does that mean? Is that if you hire somebody to do a job for you, they're liable for taking on the responsibility if they're doing something illegal. So for example, if it literally means there can be no agency to commit an act of transgression. What does this mean? I hire a hitman who is competing with me. I hire a hitman because I'm in business with somebody else and they're getting a huge share of the market and there's not enough space for me and Jack. So Jack has to go. It's that simple in my mind. So I hire somebody to use a sniper rifle and get rid of Jack. Okay? So at the end of the day, when we go to trial, I can turn around and say, I never gave Jack an order. And at trial, Jack said, yes, you told me to kill him. I said, no, I told you to make the problem disappear. What I was actually meaning is to have a discussion with him and intimidate him. I didn't say kill him. I said beat him up. Now, it's my word against Jack. No, my word against the sniper who killed Jack, right? What did we learn from there is that in the courts of heaven, I would be liable for such an act, but on earth, the Beis Din has to actually convict based on direct evidence, right? So what does that mean? It means that if the digger, for example, is digging illegally in the public domain, then at the end of the day, he's responsible because he took money for an illegal act. He's legally responsible for creating the damage. You know the laws of the Torah. You know what's right and wrong. And therefore, if you take on an illegal act, at the end of the day, who are you meant to listen to, a human being or Hashem? Hashem. And if Hashem says an act is inappropriate, then you cannot commit that act to say you're just following orders. The Nazis killed millions of people by just saying we followed orders. So Gavin's point is correct, is that at the end of the day, the digger has liability. But there are two factors here there are three factors that we have to take into account. The first thing is that the Gemara is proposing, firstly, that that digger didn't create a sufficient amount of digging enough to become a partner in the pit. Let me tell you what I'm saying. Is that if the digger is not the creator of the pit. That's why I didn't say the pit owner. The digger is used in this case in the Gemara to expand the pit, but not to the extent that he creates culpability. What do we mean? Is that the pit itself is 10 tefachim deep, which means I, as the pit owner, have created a lethal pit. This guy made it 11 tefachim deep or an 11 tefachim wide or whatever. It's not the width, it's the depth. So he didn't contribute enough to make it a further damaging pit. If he made it 20 tefachim, he would be partners of responsibility and I would. If I made it 9 tefachim and hired him to make it the 10th, he's made a legally lethal pit. So we're saying he hasn't created significant amount of damage where he becomes liable, because the sense of it is that then he, not the owner of the pit, would be responsible. Rabbi Nassan couldn't make the owner of the pit liable if the digger of the pit was sufficiently responsible to create the pit to that level of culpability, as well as creating the initial damage. Okay, so that's one point. Second thing of it is he is responsible as the agent, but he's not. Why do we make the owner of the pit liable? Let's say, according to Rav Nassan, that let's make the digger liable and the owner of the pit, because they both contributed to it. So one of the reasons why we say that they didn't both contribute to it is, number one, even if you hold the digger, he didn't contribute to make it a lethal pit. It either was a lethal pit, or there wasn't significant damage enough where he contributed, where he could become an equal partner. In other words, they both created the 10 tefach as partners, or he added the 10th, or he added another 10 to the 10. You get what I'm saying? Secondly, is that the sound of the digging is known as a causative act. Now, I've said to you in the past that the problem is this term causative act. Causative act means I've caused the problem. So in English, that's a confusing term, because it means I've caused it. Why shouldn't I pay for it? I want you to think of the word grama as indirect damage or indirect act. It's a lot easier to understand. I'm sorry, the Gemara uses the term in the explanation in English as causative. I would like you to use the term grama as indirect. In other words, I tie somebody to what do you call that thing when you walk out at the ocean and there's a bridge towards
the jetty?
A dock. No, the docks. Not the docks.
Jetty.
Whatever. Not a jetty. I don't know. It slipped my mind at the moment. But you know what I'm saying. And you wait for the tide.
It's called a pier.
Pier.
Yeah, that's right.
Kevin, one of my peers gave me the solution to a pier.
Mm-hmm.
And it appeared when he gave me the solution.
Absolutely. Magically appeared, yes.
In the background.
Yeah.
On the pier.
No, so the thing of it is on a pier, you tie a person to a pier, you wait for the tide to come in. Now that's very different to holding somebody underwater. So in Shemaim, you're responsible both ways. The Beis Din can't hold you responsible if you tied the person, because it's known as groma. You're only responsible for a direct act. And that answers Gavin's question. Because if you hire a hitman, you never pulled the trigger. So you're off the hook in this world. Okay? And the person that pulled the trigger is the agent and bears responsibility in this world because he did the action. So the digger never pushed the animal in the pit. He gave the animal a fright by digging, but he never pushed the animal in. And therefore, because he cannot be held liable, why? Because he indirectly caused the animal to fall in, not directly. He can't be partners in the payment. Therefore, we make sure that, as Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said, that the owner of the pit is actually responsible for payment in this case. You understand? Because the rabbis would say nobody pays. Because again, the digger would be liable because he caused the act, but because it's indirect, there's an exemption. He never pushed the animal in the pit. Therefore, he doesn't pay for the animal that's in the pit, neither does the pit owner, because he wasn't the one that caused the damage to the pit owner. Why? Because had the animal not been given a fright to fall in, a normal animal with normal faculties exempts the owner of the pit. It's only if the animal was young or deranged or immature. Does that make sense? So in that particular case, the owner of the pit only in that case is liable, but not for a healthy, mentally functioning, mature animal with experience. All right, let's go on. So we learned two principles from Rav Nassan. Gavin, what are the two principles?
Got it, Kevin?
Gavin, you should, I think you know it. He's just being modest here. I'm Rav Nassan.
We taught two principles.
Okay, wait a minute. Yeah.
Okay.
Gavin, have a go. No, Gavin, you definitely know it.
I think I remember. So the Rabbi Nathan says that if the rabbis say that if the animal, if there's a noise and the animal falls in, then it's the what's it called? It's the digger's fault directly because he's directly responsible. Whereby with Rabbi Nathan, they're not correct, yeah?
No, but carry on. I'm listening.
Okay, but Rabbi Nathan says that if you that you jointly and severally liable, which means you and the digger, the owner and the digger are both responsible for the damage, jointly and severally. Whereby that's why I thought the rabbi said that you were solely responsible.
Okay, just want to make one thing clear. You've got the principle, and what do you mean by jointly and severably? What do you mean?
So if the digger doesn't have any money, then he can go 100% to the owner of the pit and get all the money from the owner of the pit. So let's say the damage is 200. What do we use?
Zuzim.
Zuzim, yeah. Let's say it's 200 Zuzim. If generally you go to both parties and you get 100 from each. But if one party can't pay his 100, then the other party has to still pay the full amount, the full 200.
Okay. So just want to clarify one or two things with you, Gav. You write in a few things and a couple of things you off course, but I just want to go through it with you. The first thing that you've got to know is that there are two opinions, okay? The one started by the Ramor, the Yad Ramor, and by the Tur Choshen in Mishpat. And the other one is also by the Tur, by the Maharam Merottenberg, right? So these are two opinions. So the first opinion by the Ramah, as started by the Tur, is that Rabbi Nassan only applies the case of the other mazikin, the other damager, picking up the shortfall, okay, if one of them fled and one of them has no funds. So you've got two people that owe money, okay, as partners, jointly and severally. One is left or one doesn't have any money, okay? And in that case, the damaged party can then collect the shortfall from the other party. There's the other opinion in the Gemara that basically says that the Torah only exempts one of the partners or the liability legally if it falls upon the other. But if one of them absconds or is a pauper, it doesn't fall on the other one. So let me give you an example of what I'm saying. Is that if you have two parties, right? And in one of those parties, they share partnership of responsibility, so to speak, and one of those parties gets a legal exemption in a certain manner. Why? Because say, for example, that in this case, right, the digger, he doesn't have to pay anything because he never pushed the animal in. The sound that he made the animal fall in. That's indirect. He never pushed the animal in physically. There's no direct contact. So he's legally off the hook. Therefore, the owner of the pit picks up the shortfall and pays all the damage, according to Rav Nassan. Okay? Because that's a legal reason. But if we say that the digger actually came out and pushed the animal in the pit, but he didn't end up having any money or he absconded, the owner of the pit doesn't pick up the shortfall. He only has to pay half of his share. He doesn't have to pick up the digger's shortfall. Why? Because they don't count something where you don't have a legal leniency as making the other one pick up the cost of the shortfall. So there's an opinion that if somebody absconds or they don't have the money, the other one picks up the shortfall. But in a case where there's a legal exemption, getting the first one off the hook, the second one picks up the shortfall only in that case. Does that make sense? That's number one. Number two, Rav Nassan wouldn't say, for example, that the digger of the pit only pays half. In this case, he would pay all because the digger never created the direct damage. Now, the rabbis would say something different. They would say that the digger of the pit gave the animal a fright, never pushed the animal in, and so he's exempted because it never directly pushed the animal in. But he doesn't hold that, the rabbis don't hold that the owner of the pit is liable as a partner, even though the animal died in the pit, because he never caused the issue. So they just look at the primary damager. They don't see partners in damaging, the rabbis. And in this case, the damaged ox, the owner of the damaged ox would get no money because the ox wasn't pushed in by the digger. He merely indirectly got a fright from the digger. The digger is not a partner in the pit in the sense that he dug enough to even make himself liable by creating a lethal pit, because if the digger then created a lethal pit and added to that lethal factor, there could be an argument by saying that it's as if he owned the pit. Does that make sense? At least according to certain opinions. So in this case, according to the rabbis, that the owner of the damaged animal wouldn't collect anything. According to Rabbi Nassan, is that because there's a legal exemption where it's groma indirect from the digger of the pit giving the animal a fright, you collect all the money then from the owner of the pit, because if there wasn't a pit there, as Kevin quite rightly said, the animal wouldn't have died. Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to go into more detail tomorrow. This wasn't on its own totally productive, where we covered a lot of ground, but I guess it's better than nothing. So we learned two things from Rabbi Nassan in bottom line, is that you have shared responsibility for both people that caused the animal to die. Okay, now we're going to discuss, does it mean that each one's responsible in their entirety on their own, but you don't pay the damaged party twice, therefore they're considered partners, but each one is liable in their own capacity? Or do they share responsibility, at which case it has certain legal implications? Okay, so number one, we learned that Rav Nassan said that there is this, in other words, besides holding the owner of the hazard liable, there's shared culpability when another party causes the fall. And let's just say in a case where the person pushes the animal in, just to be more specific. And the second novelty that Rav Nassan holds is that when there are any two damages in collaboration, they share liability, and if for some reason one of the parties is exempt, the other one must make up the shortfall. As to the shortfall, in certain rabbinic opinions, as Gavin said, whether the person is can't afford to pay one of the damages or absconds, the other party picks up the shortfall. According to other opinions in the Gemara, only if there's a legal exemption, like it's a tam ox or it's indirect, where the one party isn't liable, the other one picks up the shortfall, but not if there's no money or he absconds. It's not fair to the other partner. All right, we can end off on that note. I hope it made sense to you.
Arthur and Damon, if you're having a birthday party or an afternoon tea, and Arthur promises to make you scones, don't let him abscond and let Gavin back the scones.
That's true. Cheers, Bert.
Yes, guys.
Yes.
Arthur, I hope you take a sleeping tablet tonight. Are you at the hospital tonight? Are you sleeping at the hospital tonight? Jesus.
4 nights in a row, I think it says.
Yeah, it's 4 nights in a row.
Crazy, mate. Listen, you're doing mitzvahs. Good.
I'm exhausted, but I'm doing it.
All right.
Yeah.